It's Sunday, February 1st, 2026. And if you're listening to this, there's a pretty good chance you're doing it from inside, wrapped in a few extra layers.
Or maybe staring at a flight cancellation notice on your phone.
Exactly. Or, just wondering if the federal agency you work for, or maybe one you rely on for something, is actually going to be open for business tomorrow.
It has been a weekend of convergence. That's really the only word for it. Usually when we prep for one of these deep dives, we have these nice, neat buckets, politics over here, weather over there, markets in the middle.
Right.
But looking at the sources from the last 48 hours, the briefings on this Arctic blast, the legislative texts, the intelligence reports on Iran, the buckets are gone. It's all just one spilling, chaotic mess.
That is exactly the feeling, isn't it? It's not just a lot of news. It feels more fundamental. It feels like the actual operating system of modern life is, I don't know, glitching.
That's a good way to put it.
We have this literal physical storm, this massive Arctic blast that has actually frozen parts of Niagara Falls, which is just a wild, terrifying image.
It really is.
And that's layered right on top of this political freeze happening in Washington.
And a geopolitical freeze in Ukraine, and a sort of trade freeze, or at least a cooling with China.
Right.
The theme it forces itself on you. Systems under stress.
So that's our mission today, to map the cracks.
I think so. We need to try and understand how a frozen pipe in a Texas oil refinery actually connects to a blocked budget vote in the House of Representatives, and then how both of those things end up impacting the price of the little computer chip inside your phone.
It all connects. Okay, so let's start with the most immediate pain point for a lot of people right now, the government shutdown.
Right.
Now, we've been here before. We all kind of know the choreography of these things, but the sources we're seeing are all flagging this one as structurally different.
Yeah.
It's not just a fight over money, is it?
No, not at all. This is not about the debt ceiling or, the big top-line spending numbers. This is what you'd call a policy shutdown. As of midnight on January 30th, the money stopped flowing to very specific parts of the government.
About the whole thing.
Not the whole thing, and that's key. It's because of a fundamental disagreement on the methodology of enforcement. Congress actually managed to clear the spending packages for most of the other agencies.
So the lights are still on at, say, the Department of Education.
The lights are on at Education, they're on at NASA, but the House just flat out refused to move the funding bill for the Department of Homeland Security.
It's a targeted blackout then.
Precisely. And the friction point, the real heart of the dispute, is Immigration and Customs Enforcement, or ICE.
Right.
For the last year, maybe more, we've seen the administration ramping up what they've been calling high-intensity enforcement. And the opposition in the House, which is being driven by a very loud, very mobilized constituency, they drew a line in the sand.
And they demanded something called statutory guardrails. Let's define that. When I say the guardrails, are we talking about, budget caps? Are they just trying to defund the agency?
That's the key question. And no, it's more specific than that. We're talking about operational rules of engagement, actual rules written directly into the appropriation bill itself.
So into the law that gives them the money.
Exactly. They want to legally bind ICE agents on things like the use of facial recognition technology. They want rules on how warrants are executed at what they call sensitive locations, hospitals, schools, places of worship.
And body cams, I saw that was in there too.
Mandatory body cam footage availability, yes. The argument from the House leadership is essentially, we are not going to fund this agency on autopilot anymore. If you want the money, you have to accept these civil rights constraints.
And the administration's counter-argument, I assume, is that this is just micromanaging law enforcement to the point where they can't do their job.
To the point of paralysis, that's the term they're using. The White House is calling it a poison pill. Their argument is, look, if you start writing patrol tactics into a budget bill, you're not just slowing things down, you're actively endangering agents and making border security impossible.
But this isn't just a debate happening in some committee room in D.C.
No. And this is where that convergence thing comes right back in. The shutdown happened to coincide almost perfectly with the so-called general strike on January 30th.
The term general strike is one of those things you read about in history books, You don't really expect to see it in modern America. But looking at the reports out of Minneapolis, Chicago, even on the East Coast with the transport network, this was coordinated. This wasn't just people calling in sick.
It was an explicitly political labor action. And that is a very serious legal gray area in the United States.
Right, because of the Taft-Hartley Act.
Exactly. Under Taft-Hartley, purely political strikes are generally not protected activity. But the unions and the organizers, and we're talking about a broad coalition here, teachers, healthcare workers, crucial logistics personnel, they were very clever in how they framed this.
How so?
They framed it as a safety and civil rights issue. The narrative wasn't just we're protesting a policy. The narrative was that the administration's aggressive immigration crackdowns were actively destabilizing communities and, crucially, their workplaces.
So they pivoted the argument away from we want higher wages or better benefits to we cannot safely and effectively do our jobs in this environment.
Exactly. And that shift is so critical because if labor power is now being leveraged directly to force policy changes on something like immigration, that completely rewrites the economic and political
A
calculus.
business community must be livid.
Livid is a good word. They see this as holding the entire supply chain hostage for a political goal. And you saw the results this weekend. The chaos at the airports. I mean, you had this 1-2 punch of the Arctic blast grounding flights, and then the labor slowdowns gumming up the works for the flights that could take off. The whole system just seized up.
It really raises a massive structural question then. If immigration policy is now a must-pass condition for keeping a key part of the government open, are we just looking at a permanent state of economic volatility?
That is the single biggest fear among economists right now. If every single budget cycle is going to become a referendum on the specific tactics of the Border Patrol, then yes, we are absolutely going to see these partial shutdowns become the norm, not the exception.
And that creates a risk premium on, well, on everything the U.S. government does, right?
On everything. And while Washington is arguing over the checkbook, the actual conflict on the ground is getting much uglier and much more legalistic.
You must be talking about what's happening in Minnesota, the Minnesota test case, as some are calling it.
Yes. This is where federalism just hits a brick wall at 100 miles an hour. So the administration pushes this surge in deportations in several states. In response, Minnesota state officials, the attorney general, effectively sued the federal government.
They sued their own country's federal agents.
They did. They alleged that federal agents were systemically violating the civil rights of Minnesota residents during these sweeps, and they went to a federal judge and asked for an emergency injunction to halt all operations.
So they were essentially asking a court to hit the pause button on federal law enforcement within their state's borders.
Right. And on January 31st, just this weekend, the judge denied that emergency order.
So the raids continue.
The raids continue for now, but here's the nuance. The judge didn't rule on the merits of the case. He didn't say Minnesota was wrong. He only said that the very high legal bar for an immediate emergency halt hadn't been met. So the legal fight will proceed, but the signal it sends is just one of chaos.
You have state police and federal agents operating in the same cities with completely opposing mandates from their superiors.
It is a fundamental clash of sovereigns playing out in real time.
And then, as if that wasn't enough, President Trump just threw a whole can of gasoline on this fire over the weekend. His statement on February 1st was that, well, it was very specific.
It was. He said, and this is a near quote, that the federal government would not intervene in riots in Democratic-led cities unless they were specifically asked to. But, and this is the key part, he vowed to protect federal buildings powerfully.
The bifurcation of the citizenry, that's the phrase that comes to mind.
That is the takeaway, absolutely. He's essentially saying that federal protection is transactional, it's conditional. If you are in a jurisdiction that opposes him politically, you're on your own regarding general public safety, unless the trouble touches federal property.
It politicizes the entire concept of law and order to an extreme degree. It reframes protesters not as citizens with grievances, but as insurrectionists and agitators who are somehow outside the fold of federal protection.
It's a dangerous path.
But here's the twist in all this. While all this rhetoric is heating up, there's a sign that the voters themselves might be cooling on the whole strategy. We had that special election in Texas on Sunday.
The wait, what? Moment of the entire weekend, for sure. A state Senate seat in a district that is deep, deep red. A seat the GOP has held for decades.
And it wasn't just that the Democrat won, it was how it happened. The Mangier-aligned candidate conceded, and conceded early.
And he used a very specific phrase. He called it a wake-up call. In politics, that's not just a concession, that's code. It's code for we push too hard and our own base is telling us to pull back.
It suggests that all this chaos, the shutdown, the aggressive rhetoric, the strikes disrupting daily life, It might be triggering a backlash even among conservative voters.
They want stability. At the end of the day, most people don't want their airports closed and their government services in limbo. If the GOP can lose a safe seat in Texas in this environment, I mean, that puts every single swing district for the 2026 midterms suddenly in play.
So the political capital for this strategy seems to be eroding. Let's pivot, though, from political capital to actual capital, to the money. Because while the voters are reacting to all this chaos, the financial markets are trying to price it in. And there's a huge new player entering the arena.
Kevin Warsh, the nominee to be the next chair of the Federal Reserve.
Trump announced this over the weekend. Now, Warsh isn't some unknown. He's a known quantity. He was a Fed governor before. He has a Morgan Stanley background. He's not an outsider. But the context of his nomination it's explosive.
It's the context of the dual mandate versus what you might call the single will. The Fed's job, by law, is twofold: price stability and maximum employment. That's it.
The dual mandate.
The dual mandate.
Yeah.
But the White House's desire, its single will, is for lower interest rates, and they want them immediately to juice the economy before the midterm elections.
And that tension has been building for a year now. Trump wants cuts, but the economic data has been saying, be careful.
It's been flashing yellow for sure, and now Kevin Warsh is stuck right in the middle of it. The single biggest question hanging over his confirmation will be, if he gets the job and he cuts rates, will anyone believe he's doing it for economic reasons?
Or will they just think he's a political puppet?
That is the shadow that will be hanging over the Eccles building. I mean, central bank independence is a fundamental pillar of the entire global financial system. If the market starts to believe that the Fed is cutting rates just because the president told it to, you're going to see long-term bond yields spike.
Because investors will anticipate runaway inflation down the road.
They won't trust the Fed to be the adult in the room anymore to take away the punch bowl. And the economic data is not making his life any easier. We got the producer price index, the PPI numbers on Friday. Inflation is not dead.
It's like zombie inflation.
It's zombie inflation. It's coming back to life. And the driver for this recent uptick is fascinating. It's tariffs. We are finally seeing the empirical, undeniable proof that the import taxes from the last couple of years are being passed through to consumers.
So the companies aren't just eating that cost in their margins.
For a while they were, but not anymore. They're putting it directly on the price tag, which means we now have this tariff-induced inflation.
So if the Fed cuts rates to please the White House, they just pour fuel on that inflation fire. But if they raise rates, or even hold them steady to fight the inflation, they risk crushing the economic growth that the president is demanding.
It's a classic stagflationary pressure. You're pressing the gas and the brake at the exact same time. It's a terrible position to be in. And all of this is happening while the very engine of the global economy is undergoing this massive fundamental swap.
You mean the shift from oil to silicon?
Well, we always talk about oil as being the lifeblood of the 20th century economy. But looking at the news coming out of Asia this weekend, it's clear that silicon, specifically high-end AI chips, is the new barrel of crude.
You're talking about Jensen Huang, the CEO of NVIDIA, being in Taiwan.
Right. On the surface, he's there to confirm that this huge investment in OpenAI is still on track, which is big news in itself. But the real question is, why was he physically in Taiwan this weekend? We know that's where the chips are made. Is this just a routine factory visit?
Probably not, given the timing.
It's a geopolitical signaling exercise. Taiwan is the bottleneck. More specifically, the advanced packaging capacity for these chips, a technology called CoWoS, chip on wafer on substrate.
And that's the tech that lets these incredibly complex AI chips actually function.
It is. And almost all of it, the vast majority of global capacity, is located on that one island. So by going there in person, amidst all the saber rattling from China, Huang is very publicly highlighting the fact that America's entire industrial capacity for AI is physically tethered to the fate of Taiwan.
It's leverage again. It's the same theme. We can't build these sovereign AI clouds that the administration wants without Taiwan's manufacturing base.
Exactly. A tight supply of these chips slows down American AI development. A loose supply accelerates global competition. NVIDIA is starting to act less like a regular company and more like a nation state, securing its strategic resources and alliances.
And while this is happening with the new oil, the old oil economy is seeing some of the most bizarre maneuvering we've seen in years.
The Venezuela-India-U.S. triangle, I honestly had to read the source twice to make sure I was getting it right. The U.S. is actively encouraging India to buy oil from Venezuela.
To replace the oil they're currently buying from Iran.
Yes, it's either 4D chess or a very, very complex gamble. Here's the logic. The U.S. wants to strangle Iran's revenue because of the escalating nuclear threat. India is one of the biggest buyers of Iranian crude oil. So the U.S. goes to India and says, stop buying from Tehran, and in exchange, we will give you a waiver to buy from Caracas.
But wait, we have heavy sanctions on Venezuela.
We do. But the U.S. is also trying to manage a post-Maduro transition there. The thinking seems to be, you can ease sanctions on Venezuela just enough to stabilize their economy, which might, slow that migration crisis we were just talking about. And at the same time, you defund your primary adversary in the Middle East, Iran.
It's an incredible bank shot.
It is. It requires Venezuelan crude, which is a very heavy, sour type of oil, to be able to replace the specific types of Iranian barrels in Indian refineries. It's a huge logistical headache, but if it works, it strategically connects the conflict in the Middle East to the border crisis in a single trade deal.
It's just fascinating how deeply interconnected it all is. You pull a lever in Caracas to fix a problem in Tehran, which you hope solves a migration issue in Texas.
And while the U.S. is making all these intricate moves, its main global competitor, China, seems to be stalling out completely.
But the PMI numbers.
The Purchasing Managers Index, yes. It just dropped to 49.3.
And just to remind everyone who doesn't track this daily, 50 is the magic line.
50 is the line in the sand. Anything above 50 indicates economic growth. Anything below 50 means contraction. China's industrial sector is shrinking.
The factory of the world has a demand problem.
A huge one. Their consumers are not spending, and their real estate market is still, for all intents and purposes, a black hole sucking capital out of the economy. And this is really the great divergence of 2026. The U.S. economy is chaotic and overheating, while the Chinese economy is cold and deflating. And both of those conditions are incredibly dangerous for the global system.
Let's talk about that danger. Because the geopolitical storm isn't just a metaphor anymore. It feels dangerously close to becoming a kinetic war. And Iran is the big, flashing red light on the dashboard.
The red line warning that came from the Supreme Leader this weekend was about as explicit as it gets. He said a U.S. attack would ignite a regional war. And this isn't just empty rhetoric. It's a direct response to the U.S. moving the USS Abraham Lincoln Carrier Strike Group into position in the Gulf.
We're playing a very high-stakes game of chicken. The U.S. is demanding that Iran accept new limits and halt its nuclear breakout. Iran is saying, back off, or we will burn the entire region down.
The window is narrowing. Military analysts have a term for this. They call it the zone of immunity. It's the point at which Iran has enough fissile material buried deep enough under a mountain that conventional military strikes simply won't work anymore.
And the U.S. is trying to force a concession before that window closes for good.
Correct. But the dangerous variable here is the internal unrest inside Iran. The regime is weak, it's facing protests. They might actually view an external conflict, a war with the U.S., as a way to rally the population and consolidate their own power. It's an incredibly combustible mix.
And then, not so far away, you have Ukraine. We saw a headline about an energy truce on January 30th. Russia and Ukraine supposedly agreed to stop bombing each other's power grids. And for a moment, that sounded like a glimmer of hope.
It did. It sounded like a breakthrough. But the reality on the ground is just grim. The truce is already fraying, with both sides accusing the other of violations. But the bigger and frankly more scandalous story is the logistics failure on the U.S. side.
What do you mean?
New reports are confirming that the energy infrastructure aid that was promised to Ukraine months ago, we're talking about massive generators, transformers, critical repair parts, it's stalled.
It's just not arriving.
It's stuck in the bureaucratic pipeline, somewhere between a warehouse in Poland and the front lines. And in the middle of a sub-zero winter, that kind of delay is lethal. This isn't just about people being cold in their apartments. This is about the entire Ukrainian industrial base freezing solid.
If the factories can't get power, they can't repair tanks.
If the trains can't get power, they can't move ammunition. The failure of our logistics is becoming a strategic defeat for them.
It just brings us right back to that central theme of fragility, doesn't it? We promise aid we can't seem to deliver. We rely on chips that we can't produce at home. And we rely on critical infrastructure that apparently can't handle a cold snap.
Right.
Let's talk about the physical reality of this weekend for a minute. 160 million Americans under some form of winter weather alert.
It's the jet stream amplification. We're seeing these massive, wobbling Rossby waves. Basically, the barrier that normally keeps the frigid Arctic air penned up at the North Pole is becoming weak and unstable, so it dips way, way down deep into the south, freezing places that just aren't built for it.
Niagara Falls freezing over is the postcard image, the visual. But the immediate reality is the strain on the power grid.
It completely exposes the just-in-time fallacy of our modern infrastructure. We built our power grids, our gas pipelines, our water systems based on historical weather averages from the 20th century. We optimized everything for maximum efficiency, not for resiliency.
And now that the weather is routinely hitting these 3 sigma deviation events, these statistical outliers, the optimized systems just break.
They snap. And it's not just a U.S. problem. You see the exact same story playing out in the U.K. Just look at the situation with Thames Water.
The largest water provider in the United Kingdom.
And it is on the brink of being nationalized by the government. They need a £16 billion rescue package to stay afloat. And you ask why? It's because for decades, the private owners loaded the company up with debt, not to upgrade the pipes, but to pay out dividends to shareholders.
They didn't fix the leaky Victorian-era infrastructure.
They didn't. It's the exact same story as our grid. You defer maintenance, you extract value, and you just hope nothing breaks.
And then the bill comes due.
And the bill always comes due. In the U.S., the bill is a frozen power grid in Texas. In the UK, it's a massive financial bailout. And in Southern Africa, tragically, the bill is paid in human lives.
The new attribution study on the floods there.
Yeah, a new study just came out confirming what we suspected. Climate change measurably worsened the rainfall that led to those deadly floods. But they don't have the option of a bailout package. They just have the devastation. It just highlights the gross, fundamental inequality of this whole crisis.
It's heavy.
Yeah.
And we have to touch on the cultural reflection of all this chaos.
Yeah.
Because even when you try to escape into entertainment, the news cycle just follows you right in. The DOJ released another massive batch of the Epstein files on Friday.
Secrets and stages. The Epstein document dump was huge. And yes, Prince Andrew, or Andrew Mountbatten Windsor, as he's formally named in the legal documents, is right back in the spotlight, under new pressure to testify.
But if you step back from the sort of tabloid aspect of it all,
you have to, because this is really about what some people call the velvet rope of accountability.
The idea that there's a completely different legal system for the ultra-wealthy and well-connected.
Exactly. The files reveal the machinery of impunity, the systematic use of non-disclosure agreements, the use of private islands as legal black sites, the complex financial vehicles used to hide payments and connections. Releasing these files is painful, it's messy, it's ugly.
But it's necessary.
It's the only way to restore any semblance of trust in the basic concept of the rule of law. If the general public believes, truly believes, that the elites are immune, then the social contract just breaks. It dissolves.
And then from the secrets, we go to the stage. The Grammys. Usually, that's a fun distraction from the real world. Not this year.
It was a mirror. It reflected everything else that was happening. You had a K-pop group winning a major award for the first time. A cultural nod to that same globalization we were talking about with NVIDIA and the chip supply chain.
And the speeches.
The speeches.
Yeah.
You had major artists using their acceptance speeches to talk about the government shutdown, to talk about the general strike, to talk about immigration.
So pop culture isn't an escape hatch anymore. It's just another amplifier.
There is no outside the news cycle anymore. You can't retreat into entertainment to avoid the political reality because the artists themselves are living in it and they're bringing it on stage with them.
Okay, so let's try to pull all these threads together and synthesize this weekend. We have a literally frozen America, a partially shut down government, a nationwide strike over civil rights, a global energy map being redrawn in real time, and a looming war in the Middle East. What is the single through line here?
The through line is that stability is not the natural state of the world. It is a manufactured product. And like any product, it requires constant, active maintenance.
And we haven't been doing the maintenance.
We have spent the last few decades treating stability like it was free, like it was a given, like we could outsource our entire industrial base, underfund our critical infrastructure, polarize our politics to the breaking point, and ignore the clear warnings from the climate, and that somehow everything would just keep working.
We were just running on the momentum of the past.
We were running on fumes, on the momentum of a previous era. And this weekend, it feels like the momentum finally ran out. The friction took over. The so what, for everyone listening, I think, is the realization that we are entering a period of high maintenance. We have to actively work all the time just to keep the lights on, both literally and metaphorically.
It's a pretty heavy realization. We're investing hundreds of billions of dollars in artificial intelligence, this incredible Star Trek future, while the literal pipes in the ground are bursting from the cold.
And that is the defining contradiction of 2026, isn't it? We're building a spectacular penthouse on top of a crumbling foundation. And if we don't pause and go back and fix that foundation, the power grid, the system of governance, the social trust, the whole thing, the penthouse included, is going to come crashing down with it.
On that cheery thought, we'll probably leave you to go check your flight status and maybe turn up the thermostat a degree or two. Thank you for listening to this deep dive.
Stay warm out there.
We'll catch you on the next one.